Welcome back, everyone. I know many of you tune into these stories to drift off to sleep, and I truly appreciate you making me a part of your nightly routine. I carefully select each story, hoping it becomes a comforting companion as you unwind. If you enjoy these tales, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel so you don't miss out on future uploads. And I always love hearing from you. Let me know where in the world you're listening from in the comments below. Now, grab your gear, and let's dive in. The Atlanta child murders are one of the most harrowing series of crimes in U.S. history, taking place between 1979 and 1981. Over this period, at least 29 Black children, adolescents, and young adults were kidnapped and murdered in the Atlanta area. Throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s, Atlanta was in a state of panic, as reports of missing and murdered children began to rapidly accumulate. The victims were primarily male, ranging from ages 7 to 17, although there were also a few young adults among the victims. Given the nature and frequency of the crimes, the Atlanta police, along with state and federal agencies, initiated a massive manhunt to find the killer or killers. The FBI got involved, and profilers attempted to sketch an image of the perpetrator, suggesting it might be an African American male, since historically serial killers often target victims within their own racial demographic, and the abductions occurred in predominantly Black neighborhoods. In the midst of the investigation, police began surveilling various areas of interest. One night in May 1981, a loud splash was heard from a bridge over the Chattahoochee River. When police reached the location, they found Wayne Williams fleeing the scene. A couple of days later, the body of Nathaniel Cater, a 27-year-old Black male, was discovered downstream. Wayne Williams, a 23-year-old African-American freelance photographer and aspiring music producer, was subsequently arrested. Although Williams was only officially tried and convicted for the murders of two adults, Cater and another man named Jimmy Ray Payne, the police believed he was responsible for many of the child murders. After his conviction, law enforcement controversially attributed a majority of the child murders to him, asserting that the evidence suggested Williams's involvement. The most compelling evidence against Williams were various fibers found on the victims that matched his home, car, and dog. Some witnesses claimed they saw Williams with some of the victims. Williams fit the FBI's profile of the killer in several ways, including his age, race, and the fact that he lived in the vicinity of many of the abductions. Williams was found guilty in February 1982 and received 2 life sentences. Despite his conviction, many, including some of the victims' families, have questioned whether Williams was truly responsible for all the murders attributed to him. Some of the criticisms include Williams's motive for allegedly killing so many children was never made clear. Some point out that many of the child victims were strangled, while the 2 adults for which Williams was convicted were asphyxiated, suggesting different perpetrators. There were claims of potential racial bias, with some suggesting the Atlanta police were eager to close the case and prevent further panic. The case remains contentious to this day, with some people believing that the real killer or killers were never caught. Over the years, there have been calls to reopen and re-examine the cases, especially as advances in DNA technology might provide clearer answers. Regardless of the debate surrounding Williams's guilt or innocence, the Atlanta child murders case had a profound impact on the community and nation at large, shedding light on the vulnerabilities of marginalized communities and the complexities involved in large-scale criminal investigations. The accident of New Orleans is one of the most notorious unsolved serial killer cases in U.S. history. This series of attacks and murders took place in and around New Orleans, Louisiana, primarily between 1918 and 1919. The crimes, as well as the letters purportedly sent by the killer, instilled fear in the community, and are still the subject of speculation and fascination today. The Axeman's victims were usually attacked in their own homes, and the perpetrator would typically enter the premises by removing a panel from the back door. Once inside, he would attack his victims with either an axe, which was often the homeowner's own tool, or a straight razor. In most cases, the victims were Italian immigrants or Italian Americans, leaving some to believe that the crimes might have been ethnically motivated. The attacks were characterized by extreme violence, and several victims died from their injuries. The most infamous aspect of the Axemen's reign of terror was a letter dated March 13, 1919, purportedly from the killer, that was published in newspapers. In the letter, the writer claimed to be a demon from hell and stated that he would kill again at 15 minutes past midnight on the night of March 19th, but would spare any place where a jazz band was playing that night. The city's dance halls were packed, and many private parties were thrown with jazz bands playing, and no murders occurred. Despite the intense fear and massive manhunt by the police, the Axeman was never identified or caught. There were numerous theories about the killer's identity and motivation. Some believed it was a single individual, while others speculated about multiple killers or copycat crimes. Another theory was that the murders were mafia-related due to the Italian ethnicity of many of the victims. Just as mysteriously as they began, the Axemen's attacks seemed to stop after October 1919. While there were other murders in the area in subsequent years that some tried to attribute to the Axemen, there wasn't enough evidence to definitively link them. Over the years, the Axemen story has been the subject of numerous articles, books, podcasts, and television shows. The combination of the brutal nature of the crimes, the mystery surrounding the killer's identity, and the bizarre letter promising to spare those listening to jazz music have made it a lasting subject of intrigue in the realm of true crime. To this day, the identity and motive of the Axemen of New Orleans remain a mystery. The West Memphis 3 is a controversial true crime case from the 1990s that involved the murders of 3 8-year-old boys in West Memphis, Arkansas. The intricacies of the case, the legal process, and the widespread media attention it garnered made it one of the most notable and debated cases in modern American legal history. In May 1993, 3 second graders, Stephen Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers were reported missing in West Memphis, Arkansas. The following day, their bodies were found in a muddy ditch. In the Robin Hood Hills, the boys had been hogtied with their own shoelaces and appeared to have been beaten and mutilated. Given the grisly nature of the crime, there was intense pressure on local police to find the culprits. About a month after the murders, the police arrested 3 teenagers, Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly, who had a low IQ, provided a confession after several hours of interrogation without legal representation. However, many elements of his confession were inconsistent with the crime facts, and he later recanted, stating that the confession was coerced. Damian Eccles had an interest in Wicca, which local authorities took as evidence of Satanism. Given the moral panic surrounding Satanism in the 1980s and 1990s, this became a significant point against him. There was no physical evidence linking any of the 3 teenagers to the crime scene. In 1994, Miskelly was tried separately and convicted of first-degree murder for Michael Moore and second-degree murder for Branch and Byers. He was sentenced to life plus 40 years. Eccles and Baldwin were tried together and found guilty as well. Eccles, believed to be the ringleader, was sentenced to death, while Baldwin received life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The trials and convictions were widely criticized for being influenced by the satanic ritual panic and for lacking concrete evidence. Over the years, several documentaries were made, the most famous being Paradise Lost: The Child Murders at Robin Hood Hills. These films brought attention to the case and sparked a movement that argued for the innocence of the West Memphis 3. Notable celebrities and musicians, including Johnny Depp, Eddie Vedder, and Henry Rollins, joined the cause, bringing further attention and resources to it. In August 2011, after 18 years in prison and a series of legal maneuvers that introduced new DNA evidence and questioned the initial trial's integrity, the West Memphis 3 struck a deal with prosecutors. They entered an Alford plea, which allowed them to assert their innocence while acknowledging that the prosecution had enough evidence to convict. This unique plea deal led to their release from prison for time served. The real killer or killers of the 3 boys have never been found. The case remains a stark example of potential miscarriages of justice, especially when cultural prejudices like satanic ritual panic can influence the outcome. The story of the West Memphis 3 serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of rushing to judgment in high-profile crime cases. The term co-ed killer typically refers to Edmund Kemper, an American serial killer and necrophile who committed his crimes in the early 1970s. Edmund Kemper, 3, was born on December 18, 1948, in Burbank, California. His early life was troubled. His parents divorced when he was young, and he lived with his mother, Cornell, who was reportedly verbally abusive towards him. His size was also notable. By the age of 15, he stood at 6 feet 4 inches and would eventually reach a height of 6 feet 9 inches. Kemper's violent tendencies manifested early. At the age of 10, he buried a pet cat alive. Once it died, he dug it up, decapitated it, and mounted its head on a spike. At 13, he killed another family cat because he believed it favored his younger sister over him. In 1964, when he was 15, he committed his first double homicide. After an argument with his paternal grandparents, Kemper shot and killed them both. He was sent to a state mental hospital, where he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Despite his diagnosis and crimes, Kemper was released at the age of 21 with his record sealed. Between May 1972 and April 1973, Kemper went on a murderous spree, targeting mostly female hitchhikers. He would pick them up, drive them to a remote location, and then kill them. He would later commit necrophilia on their corpses. In many of these cases, after murdering his victims, Kemper would dismember the bodies and dispose of the parts in different locations. Kemper's rage culminated in the murder of his own mother, Clarnell Strandberg. In April 1973, he bludgeoned her with a claw hammer and decapitated her, then committed necrophilia with her head. He also invited her friend, Sarah Hallett, over to the house and killed her as well. After these murders, Kemper drove eastward, but turned himself in several days later. Confessing to the murders, Kemper was found guilty of 8 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life imprisonment, as California had temporarily halted capital punishment at the time. He was incarcerated at the California Medical Facility, where he reportedly spent time reading audiobooks for the blind. The gruesome nature of Kemper's crimes and his articulate manner when discussing them made him a notable figure in criminal psychology. He was extensively interviewed by the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit and was used as a case study in understanding the mind of serial killers. Kemper's life and crimes have been depicted in various media, including books, documentaries, and the Netflix series Mindhunter. The Amityville murders, also referred to as the DeFeo murders, are among the most notorious in American true crime history, not just because of the heinous nature of the crimes, but also because they're associated with one of the most famous haunted house stories, the Amityville Horror. On November 13, 1974, in the small town of Amityville, New York, 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr. brutally murdered 6 members of his family: his father Ronald DeFeo Sr., mother Louise, 2 brothers, Mark and John, and 2 sisters, Dawn and Allison. All of the victims were found in their beds, lying face down, having been shot with a .35 caliber rifle. Ronald DeFeo Jr., often referred to as Butch, initially tried to steer investigators away by suggesting that a mafia hitman had committed the crimes. However, inconsistencies in his story quickly emerged. Within a day, he confessed to the murders, stating, "Once I started, I just couldn't stop." During his trial, defense lawyers argued that DeFeo was mentally ill. He claimed to have heard voices telling him to kill his family. Despite this defense, DeFeo was found guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder in November 1975. He was sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences. About a year after the murders, in December 1975, George and Kathy Lutz, along with her 3 children, moved into the DeFeo's former home at 112 Ocean Avenue. They purchased the house at a reduced price due to its grim history. The Lutzes lived in the house for only 28 days before fleeing, claiming they experienced a series of intense and terrifying supernatural events. Their accounts included strange odors, cold spots, disembodied voices, mysterious ooze coming from the walls, and even accounts of levitations. These events were the basis for Jay Anson's 1977 book, The Amityville Horror, which later inspired numerous films, documentaries, and books. The legitimacy of the Lutz's haunting claims remains a topic of debate, with many believing they fabricated the story as a hoax, while others believe something paranormal occurred. In subsequent years, other homeowners of the Amityville house reported no supernatural disturbances, further fueling skepticism about the Lutz family's claims. Regardless of the veracity of the haunting accounts, the Amityville murders are tragic and undeniably real. The mixture of this true crime with alleged paranormal activity has kept the story alive in the public's imagination for decades. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre is one of the most infamous events in the annals of American organized crime. It took place during the Prohibition era, a time when the sale, manufacture, and transportation of alcoholic beverages was illegal in the United States, leading to the rise of bootlegging and gang warfare over control of this lucrative industry. The massacre occurred on February 14, 1929, at around 10:30 a.m. in a garage at 2122 North Clark Street in the Lincoln Park neighborhood of Chicago's North Side. 7 men associated with the George Bugs Moran North Side gang were lined up against a wall by 4 men using police uniforms as disguise. The victims were then shot and killed with Tommy guns. Those killed were James Clark, Frank and Pete Gusenberg, Adam Hayer, John May, Al Weinschenk, and Reinhard Schwimmer. The event was the culmination of a power struggle between the South Side Italian gang, led by Al Capone, and the North Side Irish gang, led by George Bugs Moran. Capone sought to consolidate his hold on the Chicago Bardcomers underworld and eliminate the threat posed by Moran and his crew. Al Capone, though never proven, is believed to have masterminded the massacre to eliminate Bugs Moran. Moran was in fact the main target, but he escaped the massacre because he happened to arrive late to the meeting. The 2 police officers entered the garage and lined up the 7 members of Moran's gang against the wall. Thinking it was just a police raid, they complied. Then, 2 other men entered, and the 4 of them opened fire with Tommy guns, killing all 7, despite the brutality of the massacre and the public outrage that followed. No one was ever tried for the murders. The police could not gather enough evidence to prosecute anyone, particularly since the mob ensured a code of silence was maintained. While it was a significant blow to Moran's operations, he continued to be active in the criminal underworld for several more years. The massacre marked a turning point in public opinion, with increased demands for law enforcement action against the gangs. Over time, it led to a decline in the gangs' power and influence. Especially as Prohibition ended in 1933, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre stands as a grim testament to the level of violence and brutality that characterized the Prohibition era's gang wars. While many other violent incidents occurred during this period, the cold-blooded nature of the massacre, coupled with its occurrence on Valentine's Day, ensured it would be remembered as one of the darkest days in organized crime. In America, the term shoe fetish slayer refers to Jerry Brudos, an American serial killer who committed his crimes during the late 1960s. His bizarre obsession with women's shoes was a significant aspect of his criminal profile. Jerry Brudos was born in 1939 in South Dakota. From a young age he exhibited unusual and troubling behaviors. He developed a fetish for women's shoes in his early years, which later escalated to more severe criminal activities. Brudos's obsession began with stealing women's shoes when he was a child. As a teenager, he progressed to attacking women, knocking them unconscious, and taking their shoes. Despite his disturbing inclinations, Brudos married and had children. He managed to keep his violent tendencies hidden from his family for some time. Brudos's crimes escalated to kidnapping, torturing, and murdering young women. He would often take trophies from his victims, such as their shoes or underwear. In some cases, he would amputate the feet of the victims and keep them as souvenirs, further indicating the severity of his shoe fetish. Brudos took photographs of his victims, sometimes dressing them up in lingerie or heels. The spree ended in 1969 when he was captured. Law enforcement connected him to the murders through evidence found in his garage and photos of his victims. Jerry Brudos was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences in Oregon State Penitentiary. Brudos died in prison in 2006 from natural causes. His chilling crimes have been referenced in various media. He has been featured in documentaries, TV series, and true crime books, which often highlight his unusual fetish and the gruesome nature of his crimes. It is essential to remember that while Brutus's case is notorious due to the shocking and heinous nature of his actions, it is also a reflection of the complexities of criminal psychology and the importance of early intervention and treatment in potentially dangerous individuals. The Toy Box Killer refers to David Parker Ray, a convicted serial killer and torturer of women who committed his crimes around the area of Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, from possibly the 1950s through the late 1990s. The case is notorious, not just because of the number of victims, but because of the depraved nature of the crimes and the elaborate preparations Ray made. David Parker Ray's nickname, the Toy Box Killer, comes from a trailer he owned, which he referred to as his toy box. This trailer was equipped with a horrifying array of torture instruments and devices. Ray spent upwards of $100,000 outfitting this trailer, and it was here that he tortured his victims. The trailer's existence was known to several other individuals, some of whom participated in or were complicit in his crimes. Ray did not act alone in many of his crimes. His girlfriend, Cindy Hendy, was often an accomplice, helping to kidnap and torture victims. There is evidence suggesting that other individuals may have known about or been involved in Ray's activities, including his daughter, Glenda Jessie Ray. Ray is suspected of having tortured and killed up to 60 people. Though exact numbers remain uncertain, his modus operandi involved kidnapping, drugging, and torturing his victims inside the toy box. He would often play an audio tape for his victims upon their awakening, detailing the horrific acts that awaited them. This tape has been entered into evidence, and transcriptions of it can be found online. The case unraveled in March 1999, when a naked woman, wearing only a dog collar and chain, managed to escape from Ray's home and ran to a nearby house to get help. This led to Ray's arrest. Upon investigation, police discovered the toy box, and the magnitude of Ray's crimes began to unfold. In 2001, David Parker Ray was tried and convicted of numerous crimes related to the abduction and torture of multiple women. He was sentenced to 224 years in prison. Cindy Hendy received a 36-year prison sentence for her role. David Parker Ray died on May 28, 2002, a mere 8 months after his sentencing, while incarcerated at the New Mexico State Penitentiary. The full scope of Ray's crimes is unknown. Police found evidence suggesting that Ray had been active for decades, including diaries he kept detailing many of his tortures and murders. Personal belongings of numerous missing women were also found at his residence. Despite these findings, very few of his victims have been identified, and to this day, many of their fates remain unknown. The case of David Parker Ray is often regarded as one of the most disturbing in American true crime history, not only because of the sheer brutality of the crimes, but because of the way Ray meticulously planned and executed his acts of torture. Richard Kuklinski, popularly known as the Iceman, is one of the most notorious figures in the annals of true crime. Born in 1935 in Jersey City, New Jersey, he led a double life as a loving father and husband in suburban New Jersey and a cold-blooded mafia hitman. Kuklinski had a turbulent childhood, marked by severe abuse from his parents. The early exposure to violence is believed to have played a significant role in shaping his life later as a criminal. Richard began his criminal career with petty crimes and quickly moved to more serious offenses. He became associated with the Gambino crime family in New York and started working as an enforcer. Kuklinski's nickname, the Iceman, was derived from his modus operandi to throw off the time of death estimation. He'd sometimes freeze the bodies of his victims before disposing of them. Over time, he became known for using a variety of methods to kill, including guns, knives, strangulation, and even cyanide. Outside of his criminal activities, Kuklinski lived a seemingly normal suburban life. He was married and had children. His family claimed that they were unaware of his criminal activities and believed that he was a businessman. That in the 1980s, law enforcement began to suspect Kuklinski's involvement in several murders. Using an undercover agent, they were able to gather enough evidence to arrest him in 1986. In 1988, he was convicted of multiple murders and was subsequently given to life sentences. Kuklinski gave several interviews during his time in prison. These interviews provided an unnerving look into the mind of a hitman, showcasing his lack of remorse for his actions. He claimed to have killed over 100 people, though the exact number remains unknown. Richard Kuklinski died in 2006 while incarcerated. The official cause of death was complications related to a rare inflammatory disease. The Iceman's life has been the subject of documentaries, books, and even a Hollywood film titled The Iceman, starring Michael Shannon as Richard Kuklinski. His life story is a stark reminder of the duality that some individuals can embody, being loving family members on one side and remorseless killers on the other. The Butcher Baker is a nickname given to Robert Hansen, an American serial killer, who was active in Alaska during the 1970s and early 1980s. Hansen's crimes were particularly heinous, and the investigation and capture surrounding him became notable in the annals of true crime. Born in 1939 in Iowa, Hansen had a troubled childhood. He had developed a stutter and was left-handed, for which he was teased and bullied, leading to a deep-seated resentment towards people. He also had several run-ins with the law in his youth, mostly for petty crimes. In the 1960s, Hansen moved to Anchorage, Alaska, where he set up a bakery and appeared to live a relatively normal life. He had a family and was even respected in his community. Unbeknownst to those around him, Hansen began living a double life. Over a 12-year period, from 1971 to 1983, Hansen is believed to have kidnapped, raped, and murdered at least 17 women. His victims were often strippers or sex workers. Hansen's modus operandi involved abducting these women, then flying them to remote locations in the Alaskan wilderness in his private plane. Once in these remote areas, he would release the women and then hunt them down like game animals. With a rifle, Hansen's crimes began to unravel in 1983, when a 17-year-old prostitute, Cindy Paulson, managed to escape from his clutches and reported him to the police. While initially he wasn't considered a prime suspect due to his seemingly unassuming life, further investigations revealed a trophy collection of jewelry and a map marking grave sites in his home. Using the map and with the help of Paulson's testimony, the police began to uncover the bodies of numerous women in the locations indicated on Hansen's map. In 1984, Robert Hansen was sentenced to 461 years, plus a life sentence without the possibility of parole. He was convicted for the murders of 4 women but confessed to 17, though the true number might be higher. Hansen died in prison in 2014. The crimes of the Butcher Baker have been the subject of numerous documentaries, books, and movies. In 2013, the film Frozen Ground, starring Nicolas Cage and John Cusack, is based on the investigation into Hansen's crimes. The case underscores the dangers of assuming that outward appearances of normalcy equate to inner goodness. Hansen's ability to hide his dark side from his community for so long is a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous predators can live right next door. The Happy Face Killer refers to Keith Hunter Jesperson, a Canadian-born American serial killer who murdered at least 8 women in the United States during the early 1990s. He was dubbed the Happy Face Killer because of the smiley face drawings he included in his letters to the media and prosecutors. Who was born on April 6, 1955, in Chilliwack, British Columbia, Canada, had a tumultuous childhood and showed early signs of violent tendencies. As an adult, Jesperson worked as a long-haul truck driver, a profession that enabled him to travel extensively and commit crimes across different states. Jesperson's killing spree began in January 1990. His victims were mostly women, who led risky lifestyles, such as prostitutes. He strangled most of his victims and often disposed of their bodies in remote areas. The case got significant attention due to the letters Jesperson wrote to media outlets and law enforcement agencies. In these letters, he detailed his crimes, expressed remorse at times, and drew smiley faces, which led to his nickname. He began writing these letters in part because of a false confession to one of his crimes by 2 people seeking attention. To counter their claims and assert his responsibility, Jesperson began his letter-writing campaign. Jesperson was arrested in 1995. While in custody, he confessed to the murder of a woman named Julianne Winningham, his then-girlfriend. As the investigation continued, Jesperson began revealing details of other murders he committed. Keith Hunter. Jesperson was convicted of several murders and received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. The Happy Face Killer case has been the subject of various documentaries, movies, and books. One unique perspective is from Melissa Moore, Jesperson's daughter, who has shared her experience of discovering her father's true identity and the aftermath of his crimes in interviews, a book, and TV appearances. The case highlights not only the dark journey of a serial killer, but also the trauma experienced by the families of those involved, whether they are the families of the victims or the killer himself. The Grim Sleeper is the nickname given to Lonnie David Franklin Jr., an American serial killer who murdered at least 10 women in Los Angeles, California, over a span of more than 2 decades. From 1985 to 2007, the name Grim Sleeper was given to him because there seemed to be a long period of inactivity between his sprees. However, it's suspected that there may have been many more victims during the supposed dormant period. Most of the Grim Sleeper's victims were African American women. Many were involved in prostitution and drug use. They were often sexually assaulted, shot, and then their bodies were discarded in alleys and dumpsters. Despite the long duration of his criminal activities, Franklin eluded the police for years. Initially, the murders in the 1980s were linked by ballistics evidence. However, a significant gap in the known murders between 1988 and 2002 led authorities to initially think the killer had gone dormant or died. That's when he earned the moniker Grim Sleeper. The big break in the case came in 2010. DNA from Franklin's son, who had been convicted of a felony weapons charge, showed a familial match to DNA recovered from several crime scenes attributed to the Grim Sleeper. The evidence led investigators to Lonnie David Franklin Jr. following his identification. Police acquired a sample of Franklin's DNA to solidify the match. He was arrested in July 2010. In 2016, Lonnie David Franklin Jr. was found guilty of 10 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. He was sentenced to death. Investigators believe he might be responsible for many more murders, but these suspicions have not been definitively proven. On March 28, 2020, Franklin was found dead in his cell at San Quentin State Prison. The cause of his death was not immediately disclosed, but there was no sign of trauma. The Grim Sleeper case highlights the challenges in investigating serial murderers, especially when victims come from vulnerable communities. It also underscores the evolving role of DNA evidence in solving cold cases. The case has been the subject of numerous documentaries and news features, exploring both the crimes and the societal issues surrounding the investigation. The dating game killer refers to Rodney James Alcala, a convicted rapist and serial killer who was active during the late 20th century. His nickname is derived from an unsettling fact. In the midst of his crime spree, Alcala appeared as a contestant on the popular television game show, The Dating Game, in 1978, and even won. Rodney Alcala was born in 1943 in San Antonio, Texas. He had a turbulent upbringing that included a period of abandonment by his father and instances of childhood sexual abuse. Over the course of several years, Alcala committed multiple murders in California. He had a modus operandi of approaching young women and offering to take their pictures. After luring his victims, he would then assault, torture, and kill them. He sometimes took photos of his victims before, during, and after the crimes. It is worth noting that the full extent of his crimes may never be known. Officially, he was convicted of 7 murders, but estimates of his total victim count range much higher. In 1978, Alcala was chosen as a contestant on the television show The Dating Game. At the time, he was a convicted rapist and registered sex offender. He was introduced as a successful photographer and ended up winning the date with the Bachelorette. However, the Bachelorette later refused to go out with him because she found him creepy. This episode of the game show has since become infamous because of the stark juxtaposition of Alcala's public demeanor with the heinous crimes he was committing. Alcala was first arrested for one of his crimes in 1979. He would be tried multiple times for various cases, with some of the earlier verdicts being overturned due to legal technicalities. Ultimately, in 2010, Alcala was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder, 4 cases dating back to the 70s. DNA evidence played a significant role in his convictions. When authorities searched Alcala's belongings, they found hundreds of photographs of young women and boys. Many of these photos were released to the public in hopes of identifying individuals who could be potential victims. Some have been identified, but many remain nameless. Rodney Alcala died in 2021 while still incarcerated in California. Alcala's case serves as a haunting reminder of the depths of human depravity and the importance of always remaining vigilant. His ability to blend into society, even appearing on a national television program, underscores the fact that predators can hide in plain sight. Numerous documentaries, articles, and true crime shows have delved into the chilling story of the dating game killer, often emphasizing the eerie dissonance between Alcala's public persona and his hidden life of crime. The Clutter family murders are one of the most notorious true crime cases in American history, in large part due to the book In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, which chronicled the events surrounding the crime. The Clutters were a respected and well-liked family living in the small farming community of Holcomb, Kansas. Herbert Clutter was a prosperous farmer, and his wife Bonnie was a homemaker. They had 4 children. On November 15, 1959, 4 of the Clutters were found brutally murdered in their home. They had been bound and shot with a shotgun. There was no sign of a struggle, and little money was taken. The Kansas Bureau of Investigation, KBI, led the investigation into the murders. With very few leads to go on, the case seemed almost impossible to solve at first. However, a prison inmate would soon provide the break the investigators needed. Floyd Wells, an inmate who had previously worked for Herbert Clutter, told another prisoner named Richard Hickok about the Clutters. Hickok, thinking there might be a safe in the house filled with money, later recruited Perry Smith, and the two planned to rob the Clutters. Wells, hearing about the murders, informed prison officials that he believed Hickok and Smith might be involved. The KBI was informed, and after tracking the 2 suspects across multiple states and gathering evidence, they were arrested in Las Vegas in December 1959. In 1960, both Hickok and Smith were tried for the murders of the Clutter family. They were found guilty and sentenced to death. During their time on death row, Truman Capote interviewed them extensively for his book. His portrayal of the murders, especially Perry Smith, is sympathetic in many parts, making readers question the nature of evil and the morality of the death penalty. Hickok and Smith were hanged on April 14, 1965. The Clutter family murders had a profound impact on the small town of Holcomb and the state of Kansas. It shattered the community's sense of security, as such a violent crime was almost unheard of in such a tight-knit, peaceful community. Truman Capote's In Cold Blood was published in 1966 and became an immediate bestseller. It's often regarded as the first nonfiction novel, and its success sparked a surge in interest in the true crime genre. The book and subsequent film adaptations brought widespread attention to the case and established it as a landmark event in American crime history. The Vampire of Sacramento is a moniker given to Richard Chase, a notorious American serial killer who operated in Sacramento, California, during the late 1970s. His gruesome crimes and bizarre motivations stunned the nation, earning him this chilling nickname due to his blood-drinking habits. Richard Chase displayed signs of severe mental health issues from an early age. These signs included setting fires, harming animals, and displaying symptoms consistent with hypochondria. As he grew older, Chase developed an obsession with his personal health. He believed that his heart would occasionally stop beating, or that someone had stolen his pulmonary artery. He also believed that the bones in his skull were moving and that this could be countered by shaving his head. His drug abuse exacerbated these delusions. These beliefs eventually grew into a fixation on blood, with Chase convinced that he needed to consume blood to prevent his own blood from turning into powder. His crimes started with animals. He would capture, kill, and blend their bodies to drink their blood, believing it would prevent his own blood from crystallizing. In late December 1977 and January 1978, Chase's crimes escalated. Within a month, he killed 6 people, ranging from a 22-month-old child to a 36-year-old man. His methods and the aftermath of his crimes were particularly brutal and grisly. He would consume the blood of some of his victims and also engage in acts of necrophilia. His pattern of crimes and evidence left behind, including fingerprints, led to his eventual capture in January 1978. During his trial, his defense attorneys argued that he was not guilty by reason of insanity. The evidence of his severe mental illness was clear, but the jury found him guilty of 6 counts of first-degree murder. They believed he did understand the nature of his crimes despite his mental state. Richard Chase was sentenced to death in the gas chamber. However, he never made it to his execution. In 1980, he died in prison from an overdose of antidepressant medications, which he had been stockpiling. Chase's case is often cited in discussions about the intersection of mental illness and crime, particularly regarding how society should handle individuals who commit heinous acts due to severe mental disorders. The Cheshire Home Invasion is a harrowing true crime case that took place in Cheshire, Connecticut, in July 2007. On the morning of July 23, 2007, 2 career criminals named Joshua Komisarjevsky and Stephen Hayes targeted the Petty family home for robbery. The Petty family consisted of Dr. William Petty Jr., his wife Jennifer, and their 2 daughters, 17-year-old Haley and 11-year-old Michaela. In the early hours, Joshua spotted Jennifer and Michaela at a local grocery store and followed them home. Late that night, the 2 men invaded the Petty home. Dr. Petty was severely beaten with a baseball bat and bound in the basement. The rest of the family was taken hostage and bound in their respective bedrooms. While Stephen and Joshua initially intended only to rob the house, the situation escalated horrifically over several hours. The next morning, under the threat that her family would be harmed, Jennifer Petty was taken to the bank by Hayes and coerced into withdrawing $15,000. She managed to alert the bank teller to her situation, and the bank staff immediately notified the police. After returning from the bank, Hayes sexually assaulted Jennifer and subsequently strangled her. A fire was then set by the perpetrators, likely to destroy evidence. The 2 girls, still tied to their beds, died from smoke inhalation. Dr. Petty, despite his injuries, managed to escape to a neighbor's house to seek help as the home was engulfed in flames. Stephen and Joshua attempted to flee the scene but were soon apprehended by police who had set up a perimeter around the house. Both men were arrested and faced multiple charges, including murder, sexual assault, and arson. The trials were heavily publicized, and both perpetrators were found guilty. In 2010, Stephen was sentenced to death, and a year later, Joshua received the same sentence. However, in 2012, Connecticut abolished the death penalty, and their sentences were commuted to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The brutality and senselessness of the crime deeply affected the local community and garnered national attention. It prompted discussions on home security, the death penalty, and the rehabilitation of career criminals. Dr. William Petty, the sole survivor, went on to establish the Petty Family Foundation in memory of his wife and daughters. The foundation supports causes that were dear to the Petty women, such as education and helping those affected by chronic illnesses and violence. The Gainesville Ripper case involves a series of brutal murders that terrorized the city of Gainesville, Florida, in the late summer of 1990. The Gainesville Ripper is the nickname for Danny Rolling, who was later found guilty for the murders. Before arriving in Gainesville, Rolling had a troubled history of robberies and was a suspect in a triple homicide in his hometown of Shreveport, Louisiana. Over the course of 4 days in August 1990, Rolling murdered 5 college students. The first victims were 17-year-old University of Florida freshmen Sonia Larson and Christina Powell. They were found murdered in their apartment on August 24th. The following day, 18-year-old Krista Hoyt was found murdered in her apartment. 2 days later, Rolling killed roommates Tracy Pauls and Manuel Taboada, both 23. The victims had been posed in disturbing manners, leading authorities to believe they were dealing with a methodical and deranged killer. The gruesome nature of the murders and the rapid succession of killings over just a few days sent the community into a state of fear. Many students left town, changed their daily routines, or took extra precautions. Authorities were on high alert. Rolling evaded capture initially. He camped out in a nearby wooded area during the murders. His campsite would later be discovered by police, yielding evidence connecting him to the crimes. In September 1990, Rolling was arrested for a supermarket robbery in Ocala, Florida. After further investigation and comparing evidence found at his campsite to the crime scenes in Gainesville, he became the prime suspect for the murders of the students. Rolling wasn't initially tried for the Gainesville murders. Instead, he was tried and convicted for other crimes, including the supermarket robbery. In 1994, he was charged with the Gainesville murders. Before this trial began in 1994, Rolling unexpectedly pled guilty to all charges. During his trial, he claimed that he was motivated to kill by an evil entity inside him, named Gemini. He was found guilty and sentenced to death on all counts. Danny Rolling was executed by lethal injection on October 25, 2006, at the Florida State Prison. The Gainesville Ripper case remains one of the most notorious in Florida's history, both because of the brutality of the crimes and the sheer terror it instilled in a university community. The Preppy murder refers to a high-profile homicide case from the 1980s in New York City. The case drew significant media attention due to the backgrounds of the victim and the perpetrator, as well as the controversial defense tactics used during the trial. 18-year-old Jennifer Levin was the victim in this case. She was a recent graduate of the Dwight Englewood School and was spending her summer in the city before attending college. Robert Chambers, a 19-year-old man, was the perpetrator. He was a former student at several prestigious prep schools. The media dubbed him the Preppy Killer due to his privileged background. On the morning of August 26, 1986, Jennifer Levin's body was found in Central Park. Behind the Metropolitan Museum of Art, she had been strangled, and her body showed signs of a violent struggle. The previous night, Levin had been seen leaving a popular Upper East Side bar called Dorian's Red Hand with Robert Chambers. Chambers initially claimed he had no idea what happened to Levin. However, marks on his face and body, which appeared to be the result of a struggle, contradicted his statements. When pressed, Chambers changed his story, claiming that he accidentally killed Levin during consensual rough sex. He alleged that Levin hurt him during the act, and he reacted violently in the heat of the moment. The defense sought to portray Levin in a negative light, suggesting that her sexual aggressiveness led to her death. This tactic caused a public outcry, as many viewed it as an attempt to blame the victim. Videotapes were later discovered showing Chambers playing with a doll and making choking motions, mocking the incident and further damaging his credibility. After a lengthy and highly publicized trial, the jury was deadlocked. Before a retrial could be held, Chambers accepted a plea deal, pleading guilty to manslaughter. He was sentenced to 5 to 15 years in prison. Chambers was released from prison in 2003, after serving a full 15 years due to disciplinary infractions. During his incarceration, however, in 2008, he was sentenced to an additional 19 years in prison on drug-related charges. The Preppy murder case drew attention to issues like victim blaming and the way the media portrays both victims and perpetrators based on their socioeconomic status. The sensationalized coverage of the case also paved the way for future high-profile trials to be treated similarly in the media. The lipstick killer refers to William Aarons, an American serial killer who confessed to 3 murders in the 1940s. Aarons was dubbed the lipstick killer due to a message scrawled in lipstick at a crime scene. William Aarons was born in 1928 in Chicago. He began engaging in criminal activities at an early age, including burglaries. By the age of 17, he was committing crimes frequently. Aarons was linked to 3 murders. Josephine Ross, the 43-year-old woman, was found dead in her Chicago apartment. She had been repeatedly stabbed, and her head was wrapped in a dress, though no lipstick message was found here. The crime was eventually attributed to Aarons. Frances Brown, a 32-year-old former model, was found shot and stabbed to death in her apartment. On the wall of her apartment, written in lipstick, was the chilling message, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself." This is where the lipstick moniker originates from. Suzanne Degnan. This was the most disturbing of the three crimes. 6-year-old Suzanne Degnan was kidnapped from her bedroom. Later, her dismembered body was found in different drains around the neighborhood. This crime brought about widespread panic in Chicago. In June 1946, Aarons was arrested after being caught during a burglary. Under intense interrogation, and reportedly having been subjected to physical violence by police, Aarons eventually confessed to the 3 murders. Some historians and criminologists believe that his confessions were coerced. Given the reported brutality of the interrogations, evidence linking Aarons to the Degnan murder included a ransom note written in a handwriting that some experts claimed to match his own. However, there were also discrepancies and questionable police procedures that cast doubt over the authenticity of the evidence. Despite these concerns, facing the death penalty and under the advice of his legal counsel, Aarons pled guilty to all 3 murders to avoid execution. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms. William Aarons spent the rest of his life in prison. Over the years, he recanted his confessions, asserting that they were the result of police brutality and coercion. Several investigative reports and reviews of the case over the decades have suggested that Aarons may have been innocent of the crimes, though these conclusions remain uncontested. Aarons died in prison in 2012 at the age of 83. He was the longest-serving prisoner in Illinois at the time of his death. The Zodiac Killer is one of the most infamous unidentified serial killers in American history. He operated primarily in the late 1960s to the early 1970s in Northern California. His mysterious letters, ciphers, and taunts sent to the media and police have fueled decades of investigation and speculation. The Zodiac claimed to have killed as many as 37 people, but only 5 deaths across 4 separate incidents between 1968 and 1969 have been confirmed as being committed by him: David Arthur Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. On December 20, 1968, near Vallejo, California, Darlene Elizabeth Farron and Michael Renaud Magot. On July 4, 1969, in a parking lot in Vallejo, Magot survived the attack. Brian Calvin Hartnell and Cecilia Ann Shepard, on September 27, 1969, at Lake Berryessa, near Napa, California. Shepard succumbed to her injuries 2 days after the attack. Paul Lee Stein on October 11, 1969, in San Francisco. Starting in 1969, the Zodiac began sending letters to local newspapers, taking credit for the murders and providing details that only the killer would know. He often included cryptograms or ciphers, of which only one has been definitively solved. The letters were often marked with a symbol of a circle with a cross through it, which became known as the Zodiac sign. The Zodiac seemed to enjoy taunting the police and the public with his letters, ciphers, and phone calls. He frequently threatened more killings if his letters weren't published. Initially, the Zodiac targeted young couples in secluded areas. However, the murder of Paul Stein, cab driver in San Francisco, deviated from this pattern. This particular incident also provided a detailed composite sketch, as it was witnessed by teenagers who saw the murderer wiping down the cab and its interior after the killing. After the 1960s and early 1970s, the letters and confirmed activities of the Zodiac Killer seemed to wane. While there were other communications in the following years attributed to him, they became less frequent. The Zodiac claimed many more murders, but not all have been confirmed or linked conclusively to him. Additionally, several unsolved murders in the area have at times been suspected to be the work of the Zodiac, but evidence is inconclusive. Over the years, several suspects have been considered by various law enforcement personnel and amateur sleuths. However, the true identity of the Zodiac remains unknown. The case has been one of the greatest unsolved crime mysteries in the U.S. The story of the Zodiac Killer has captured the imagination of the public for decades. It has been the subject of numerous books, movies, and TV shows. One notable example is the 2007 movie Zodiac, directed by David Fincher, which delves into the investigation and obsession of the journalists and detectives involved in the case. Despite the significant passage of time since the last known Zodiac communication, interest in the case remains high. and it continues to be the subject of extensive research and speculation. The Black Dahlia murder is one of the most infamous unsolved murder cases in American history, capturing the public's imagination for decades. On January 15, 1947, a local resident named Betty Bersinger was walking with her young daughter in a Los Angeles neighborhood when she made a grisly discovery: the severed body of a young woman, bisected at the waist, drained of blood, and posed, with her hands above her head and her legs spread apart. Bersinger initially thought it was a discarded store mannequin before the gruesome reality set in. The victim was quickly identified as Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old aspiring actress who had come to Hollywood seeking fame. Due to her habit of wearing black clothing and her preference for the dahlia flower, she had been nicknamed the Black Dahlia by her acquaintances. Born in Boston, Massachusetts, in 1924, Short had a somewhat tumultuous childhood, marked by her father's sudden disappearance and presumed suicide. He was later found alive. At 19, she moved to California to reconnect with her father, but the reunion was short. Short then began her transient life in Los Angeles, living in various places and making acquaintances along the way. The Los Angeles Police Department, LAPD, began an extensive investigation into Short's murder. The brutality of the crime and its grim theatricality indicated that the perpetrator was either very experienced or deeply disturbed. Shortly after the discovery of the body, the LAPD received a series of letters purportedly from the killer, which contained personal belongings of Short, including her birth certificate and photographs. An anonymous woman, referred to as the Biltmore Hotel Mystery Woman, was reported to have been seen with Short just days before her death. She was never identified. The official autopsy revealed that Short had been tortured for several days. Before her death, the bisecting cut was clean, suggesting that the perpetrator had some knowledge of anatomy. Over the course of the investigation, more than 150 men and women were considered suspects. This included a number of individuals who falsely confessed to the crime, either for attention or due to mental disturbances. Despite extensive investigations, no individual was ever charged with the crime, and the case went cold. The Black Dahlia murder remains one of the most famous unsolved cases in the annals of American crime. The intrigue around the case has spawned countless books, movies, and TV series. Theories about the identity of the murderer and the motive behind the crime have ranged from plausible to outlandish. While the LAPD has occasionally revisited the case with new technology and forensic methods, the murder remains unsolved. The JonBenet Ramsey case is one of the most famous unsolved true crime cases in U.S. history. The mysterious circumstances surrounding the murder of the 6-year-old beauty pageant queen have captivated the public for decades. JonBenet Ramsey was born on August 6, 1990, in Atlanta, Georgia. The Ramsey family later moved to Boulder, Colorado. She participated in various child beauty pageants and won several titles. On December 26, 1996, Patsy Ramsey, JonBenet's mother, reported finding a ransom note on the staircase of their home, demanding $118,000 for the safe return of JonBenet. Despite the note's warning against contacting the police, the Ramseys called both the police and friends. A search of the home was conducted, but there was no sign of forced entry. Later that day, John Ramsey, JonBenet's father, and a family friend discovered her body in the basement of the family home. She had been struck on the head and strangled. The ransom note was unusually long and was written with a pen and paper from the Ramsey home, leading some to believe that the note was staged. Given the absence of any signs of a break-in and the peculiarities of the ransom note, suspicion quickly turned to the Ramsey family. However, they consistently maintained their innocence. There was DNA evidence found on JonBenet's clothing, but it did not match any family members or known suspects. In 2003, new DNA technology cleared all members of the Ramsey family of any involvement in the crime. Numerous individuals outside of the family were also considered suspects over the years, but no charges were ever filed against anyone. In 2006, a school teacher named John Mark Carr falsely confessed to the crime while he was in Thailand. He was extradited to the U.S., but the charges were dropped when his DNA did not match the DNA found at the scene. In 2008, The Boulder District Attorney's Office officially exonerated the Ramsey family based on the DNA evidence and publicly apologized to them for the cloud of suspicion. They had lived under 4 years. There have been countless theories about who killed JonBenet Ramsey. Some people believe a family member was responsible, while others think it was an intruder. There have been theories suggesting everything from a random attack to a killing by someone the family knew, and even more far-fetched conspiracy theories. The media frenzy around the case was intense, and the family faced immense public scrutiny. The mystery of JonBenet Ramsey's death has led to numerous books, documentaries, and television specials. The case remains unsolved, though the Boulder Police Department has said the investigation remains open and active. The Ramsey case is emblematic of the challenges in high-profile investigations, where media attention, public speculation, and the actual pursuit of justice can sometimes be at odds. The Lindbergh baby kidnapping is one of the most infamous crimes in American history, and it attracted tremendous public attention during its time. On the evening of March 1, 1932, Charles Lindbergh Jr., the 20-month-old son of aviator Charles Lindbergh and his wife, Anne Lindbergh, was abducted from his nursery in the Lindbergh family home in Hopewell, New Jersey. A note demanding a ransom was discovered on the WINDOWSILL. The initial ransom note demanded $50,000 for the child's return. Over the following weeks, the Lindberghs received a series of additional notes, and the amount of the ransom was eventually raised to $70,000. The Lindberghs, desperate to retrieve their son, followed the kidnappers' instructions, and the ransom was paid on April 2, 1932. However, a month later, despite the payment, the baby was not returned. Sadly, on May 12, 1932, the body of Charles Lindbergh Jr. was found in a wooded area a few miles from the Lindbergh home. The child had been killed shortly after the kidnapping. The investigation into the kidnapping spanned several years. A breakthrough came when gold certificates from the ransom money began to surface. The bills were being spent in the New York area, and their serial numbers had been recorded before the ransom was paid, allowing them to be tracked. In September 1934, Bruno Richard Hauptmann, a German immigrant, was arrested after one of the ransom bills was traced back to him. When his home was searched, additional ransom money was found, as well as other evidence linking him to the crime. Hauptmann's trial began on January 2, 1935, and was a media sensation. He was charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping. Hauptmann maintained his innocence throughout the trial, claiming the money had been left in his garage by a friend. However, the evidence against him, including the ransom money, his alleged construction of the homemade ladder used in the kidnapping, and handwriting analysis linking him to the ransom notes, led to his conviction. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. Bruno Richard Hauptmann was executed in the electric chair. On April 3, 1936, the massive publicity and public outcry over the Lindbergh baby kidnapping led to the passage of the Lindbergh Law, or the Federal Kidnapping Act of 1932, which made transporting a kidnapping victim across state lines a federal crime. While the general consensus is that Hauptmann was guilty, there have always been some doubts and conspiracy theories surrounding the case, with claims of withheld evidence, false testimonies, and potential other suspects. However, conviction remains a significant moment in the annals of American criminal justice. The Boston Strangler is the name given to the assumed murderer of 13 women in the Boston area between 1962 and 1964. The case is one of the most infamous in the history of American true crime. The victims, most of whom were sexually assaulted and strangled, typically with their own stockings, ranged in age from 19 to 85. The wide age range and changing modus operandi led to some initial doubts that a single person was responsible for all the murders. The series of murders created widespread panic among women in the Boston area. The fear was so prevalent that many changed their daily routines and took precautions, including changing their door locks and being wary of strangers. In 1964, Albert DeSalvo was arrested on unrelated charges and subsequently confessed to being the Boston Strangler. His detailed accounts of the murders and knowledge of the crime scenes lent credibility to his confession. Despite his confession, some people had doubts. DeSalvo was not charged with the Strangler murders because there was a lack of physical evidence linking him to the crime scenes. Instead, he was charged with a series of sexual assaults, for which he was given a life sentence. DeSalvo was stabbed to death in prison in 1973 and 2013. New forensic evidence emerged. DNA from the last victim, Mary Sullivan, matched Albert DeSalvo's DNA, which was obtained from a relative. This confirmed DeSalvo's involvement in at least Sullivan's murder. As a result, authorities exhumed DeSalvo's body and confirmed the match. Despite the DNA match for one of the killings, the debate continues on whether one person was responsible for all the murders or whether there might have been multiple killers. The Boston Strangler case has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and films. It's a case that highlights the challenges of criminal investigations, the power of media in shaping public perception, and the complexity surrounding confessions and convictions. It's worth noting that while DNA evidence links DeSalvo to one of the crimes, there is still some debate and uncertainty regarding his involvement in all the murders attributed to the Boston Strangler. The O.J. Simpson murder trial, officially titled The People of the State of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, was one of the most publicized and controversial trials in U.S. history. It revolved around the brutal murders of Nicole Brown Simpson, O.J.'s ex-wife, and Ronald Goldman on June 12, 1994. On June 13, 1994, the bodies of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman were found outside Brown's condominium in the Brentwood area of Los Angeles. They had been stabbed to death. Nicole's ex-husband, O.J. Simpson, a former NFL star and actor, quickly became a primary suspect. Before his arrest, Simpson led police on a televised low-speed chase in his white Ford Bronco across the highways of Los Angeles. On June 17, 1994, the event was broadcast live and is famously remembered. Simpson was in the car with a gun, and his former football teammate, Al Cowlings, was driving. Simpson eventually surrendered at his Brentwood mansion. Simpson's defense team, often referred to as the Dream Team, included prominent lawyers Robert Shapiro, Johnny Cochran, F. Lee Bailey, Alan Dershowitz, and others. The prosecution team was led by Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden. The prosecution presented a wide range of forensic evidence, including DNA from blood found at the murder scene and in Simpson's car and home. Bloody shoe prints and a bloody glove were also central to the case. The infamous phrase, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit," was coined by Cochran during a courtroom demonstration where Simpson appeared to struggle to put on a blood-stained glove, suggesting it wasn't his. The trial was filled with controversies, including allegations of racism, police misconduct, and debates about the handling and collection of evidence. The defense argued that the evidence had been tampered with or planted to frame Simpson. On October 3, 1995, after a trial that lasted more than 8 months, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty for both murders. In a subsequent civil trial, brought by the victims' families in 1997, Simpson was found liable for the wrongful deaths of Brown and Goldman. He was ordered to pay $33.5 million in damages, but the families have collected only a fraction of that amount. The trial verdict, and all the events surrounding it, evoked strong reactions from the public, often divided along racial lines. This case ignited debates about the criminal justice system, police procedures, racial relations, and the role of the media in trials. The O.J. Simpson trial remains a watershed moment in American pop culture, reflecting societal tensions and the power of television to shape public perception. Jeffrey Dahmer, also infamously known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, was an American serial killer and sex offender who murdered and dismembered 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. His crimes were particularly gruesome, involving rape, necrophilia, and cannibalism. Dahmer committed his first murder in 1978, at the age of 18, shortly after graduating from high school. He picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks, lured him to his home, and then struck him with a dumbbell before strangling him to death. He subsequently dismembered Hicks's body and buried the remains in a shallow grave in his backyard. After The murder of Hicks, Dahmer did not kill again for nearly a decade. However, during this time, he had numerous run-ins with the law for various minor offenses. Dahmer's killing spree resumed in the late 1980s, mostly in and around Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He typically targeted young men, often of African or Asian descent. Dahmer would lure his victims with offers of money or promises of alcohol, then drug them and strangle them to death. After killing them, he would often engage in sexual acts with the corpses before dismembering them. He took photographs of his victims at various stages of the dismemberment process, apparently as mementos. As his crimes progressed, Dahmer began to eat parts of his victims, believing that doing so would make them a permanent part of him. In a disturbing twist, he also tried to create zombies out of some of his victims by drilling holes into their skulls and pouring acid or boiling water into the opening while they were still alive. He believed this would leave them permanently submissive to him. Dahmer's crimes finally came to an end in July 1991 when one of his intended victims, Tracy Edwards, managed to escape and flag down 2 police officers. Edwards led the police back to Dahmer's apartment, where they discovered photographs of dismembered bodies and a refrigerator full of human remains. Dahmer was arrested and in 1992 was found guilty of 16 murders. He later confessed to a 17th. He was sentenced to 16 life terms in prison, avoiding the death penalty because Wisconsin had abolished it. In November 1994, Dahmer was beaten to death by a fellow inmate named Christopher Scarver at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. The Jeffrey Dahmer case garnered significant media attention and provoked widespread horror and fascination. His crimes raised numerous questions about the nature of evil, the causes of sociopathy, and the capacity for human depravity. Ted Bundy is one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. His crimes spanned several states in the 1970s, and he confessed to killing 30 young women, though the actual number of victims might be higher. Bundy's case is infamous not only for the brutality of his acts, but also for his ability to elude, capture, and manipulate those around him. Born Theodore Robert Quall in 1946 in Burlington, Vermont, Bundy had a tumultuous upbringing. He was raised believing that his grandparents were his parents, and his mother was his sister, to avoid the social stigma of her being an unwed mother. He later learned the truth, which reportedly had a profound effect on him. Bundy's criminal activity began with peeping into windows and escalated to theft. But these petty offenses were just the beginning. Beginning around 1974 in Washington state, young women started disappearing. These women typically had long, dark hair, parted in the middle, and many of them resembled a former girlfriend of Bundy's. His method was often to feign injury or disability, luring sympathetic women to his car and then overpowering them. In 1975, Bundy was arrested in Utah for a failed kidnapping. While awaiting trial, police started connecting him to numerous unsolved murders across multiple states. He was convicted of the kidnapping and sent to jail. Later, while preparing for a murder trial in Colorado, Bundy escaped custody twice. His second escape was successful, and he made his way to Florida. In Florida, Bundy committed perhaps his most notorious crimes on January 15, 1978. He entered the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University, attacking 4 women and killing 2. He also attacked and severely injured another woman nearby. Weeks later, he kidnapped and killed 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, his last known victim. Bundy was captured in February 1978. His trial for the Chi Omega murders was one of the first to be nationally televised. Bundy, a law school dropout, often acted as his own attorney, further increasing the media circus surrounding the proceedings. After being sentenced to death, Bundy used confessions to delay his execution, offering details on unsolved murders in exchange for stays of execution. He confessed to killing 30 women, but the true count remains unknown. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair at the Florida State Prison. Bundy's case has been examined in countless documentaries, books, and films. His charm and manipulative nature have led to debates about how such a seemingly normal person could commit such heinous acts. The case also serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of manipulation and how appearances can be deceiving. In the realm of true crime, Ted Bundy remains a haunting figure, a testament to the hidden dark sides that can lurk beneath the most ordinary of facades. The case of the Menendez brothers is one of the most notorious true crime stories from the late 20th century. Lila and Eric Menendez were the sons of Jose and Kitty Menendez. The family lived in the wealthy enclave of Beverly Hills, California, and from the outside, appeared to have a charmed life, replete with all the trappings of success and affluence. On August 20, 1989, the bodies of Jose and Kitty Menendez were found in the den of their Beverly Hills mansion. They had been shot multiple times with shotguns. Initially, the police did not suspect the brothers, as they appeared distraught and claimed they were not home at the time of the killings. However, as the investigation progressed, the behavior of the Menendez brothers began to arouse suspicion. After the murders, they embarked on a spending spree, buying luxury items and making large investments with the family's wealth. The major breakthrough came when Eric confessed to his psychologist that he and his brother had killed their parents. This confession eventually reached the police. The trial of the Menendez brothers was a media spectacle, broadcast widely on television and covered extensively by the press. Their defense attorneys argued that the brothers were driven to kill because of years of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse by their parents. The prosecution contended that the brothers murdered their parents to inherit their vast fortune. The first trial ended in 1994 with 2 deadlocked juries. It wasn't until the second trial, which concluded in 1996, that the brothers were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Since their conviction, both brothers have been serving their life sentences. The Menendez brothers' case raised numerous issues and debates about the nature of abuse, the potential motivations behind the killing of one's parents, and the influence of media on high-profile trials. The Menendez brothers' case remains a touchstone in American pop culture, and is frequently referenced in discussions about the intersection of wealth, crime, and the media. The Oklahoma City bombing is one of the deadliest acts of domestic terrorism in U.S. history. On the morning of April 19, 1995, a massive explosion rocked the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. The blast destroyed much of the building and damaged numerous surrounding buildings. In total, 168 people, including 19 children, were killed, and over 500 others were injured. Shortly after the explosion, investigators discovered the remnants of a Ryder rental truck, which had contained the bomb. The bomb consisted of a deadly mixture of ammonium nitrate and fuel oil. The rapid investigation led to 2 primary suspects, Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols. The bombing was seen as a revenge attack against the U.S. government. McVeigh was purportedly motivated by his opposition to the government's handling of the Waco siege in 1993 and the Ruby Ridge standoff in 1992. He perceived these events as examples of government overreach and abuse of power. The date of the Oklahoma City bombing, April 19th, was exactly 2 years after the Waco siege ended in a deadly fire. Timothy McVeigh was arrested shortly after the bombing for driving without a license plate and illegally carrying a weapon. His connection to the bombing was made after investigators traced the Ryder truck's rental back to him. He was tried and found guilty on 11 federal counts, including conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction, use of a weapon of mass destruction, destruction by explosives, and 8 counts of first-degree murder. In 1997, he was sentenced to death and was executed by lethal injection on June 11, 2001. Terry Nichols, an associate of McVeigh, was found guilty of conspiring to build a weapon of mass destruction and 8 counts of involuntary manslaughter for the deaths of federal law enforcement personnel. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In a separate state trial, Nichols was later found guilty of 161 counts of first-degree murder, including 1 count of fetal homicide, and was again sentenced to life in prison. The Oklahoma City bombing had a significant impact on the U.S., leading to tighter security measures around federal buildings and a reassessment of the domestic terrorism threat. The incident also served as a tragic reminder of the dangers of extremism. Today, the Oklahoma City National Memorial stands on the site of the Murrah Building. It commemorates the victims, survivors, rescuers, and all who were affected by the bombing. The memorial includes 168 symbolic chairs, a reflecting pool, and the survivor tree, an American elm that withstood the blast and remains as a testament to resilience. The Unabomber is a moniker derived from the FBI's case name, University, an airline bomber, referring to his early targets. The true identity of the Unabomber is Theodore John Kaczynski, an American former mathematics prodigy and professor turned domestic terrorist. Between 1978 and 1995, Kaczynski engaged in a nationwide bombing campaign in the U.S., targeting individuals involved with modern technology and industrial society. His homemade bombs killed 3 people and injured 23 others. His victims ranged from computer store owners to advertising executives and forestry officials, reflecting his anti-technological and nature-centric views. In 1995, Kaczynski sent a 35,000-word essay to several news outlets entitled Industrial Society and Its Future, commonly referred to as the Unabomber Manifesto. The document outlined his beliefs, particularly his argument that technological advancements are eroding human freedom and leading society towards its destruction. Kaczynski demanded that the manifesto be published, threatening further violence if his demand wasn't met. The New York Times and Washington Post, in consultation with the FBI, decided to publish the manifesto in the hope that someone might recognize the writing style or the ideas presented. The strategy worked. David Kaczynski, Theodore's younger brother, recognized similarities between the manifesto's writing style and content and his brother's earlier writings. After seeking counsel with a private investigator and an attorney, David approached the FBI with his suspicions. In April 1996, federal agents arrested Theodore Kaczynski at his remote cabin in Lincoln, Montana. There, they discovered a wealth of evidence, including a live bomb ready for mailing, bomb components, and a journal in which Kaczynski detailed his crimes, facing a potential death penalty. Kaczynski initially tried to dismiss his court-appointed lawyers because they wanted to use an insanity defense, which he vehemently opposed. He eventually pled guilty to all charges in 1998, in exchange for a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Kaczynski is serving his sentence in a supermax federal prison in Florence, Colorado. The Unabomber case is notable not only for the crimes themselves, but also for the broader societal issues it raised. Kaczynski's manifesto, while promoting violent means, sparked debates about the role of technology in society and the potential consequences of unchecked technological advancement. Additionally, the ethical implications of publishing the manifesto in response to threats, as well as the moral dilemmas faced by David Kaczynski in turning in his brother, have been subjects of discussion and analysis. The Green River Killer is one of the most infamous serial killer cases in American history. Gary Leon Ridgway was known as the Green River Killer. Ridgway was convicted of 49 murders but later confessed to 71. Some estimates based on his confessions suggest that he may have killed more than 90 people. Most of his victims were women, especially prostitutes and runaways. The murders were committed over nearly 2 decades, from the early 1980s to the late 1990s. Many of Ridgway's victims were picked up along Pacific Highway South. He would typically strangle them and then dispose of their bodies in wooded areas around the Green River Valley, hence the name Green River Killer. Some bodies were left in clusters, and sometimes he returned to the sites to engage in necrophilia. The first bodies were discovered in the Green River in 1982. Leading to the naming of the unknown murderer as the Green River Killer. Despite a large-scale police investigation, the killer remained elusive. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, detectives collected DNA evidence from some crime scenes, but due to technological limitations of the time, they couldn't conclusively link anyone to the crimes. King County Police formed the Green River Task Force, which included Detective Dave Reichert, who played a key role throughout the case. With advancements in DNA technology, by the 2000s, police were able to link Gary Ridgway to some of the murders. In 2001, he was arrested in November of that year. In 2003, to avoid the death penalty, Ridgway struck a plea deal wherein he confessed to 48 murders and agreed to help authorities locate the remains of his victims. He was later convicted of an additional murder, bringing the total to 49. Ridgway was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is currently serving his sentence at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. The case of the Green River Killer is notable for its duration. The number of victims and the lengthy time it took to capture and convict showcased the importance of DNA evidence in solving cold cases, and also shone a light on the vulnerabilities of certain populations, such as prostitutes, to becoming victims of violent crimes. Richard Ramirez, commonly known as the Night Stalker, was a notorious American serial killer, rapist, and burglar who terrorized Southern California between 1984 and 1985. His crimes were particularly brutal, and he exhibited a wide range of modus operandi, making it initially difficult for authorities to pin down a single suspect. Over the course of roughly 1 year, Ramirez committed at least 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. Ramirez's attacks were particularly brutal and seemed random at first. He targeted both the elderly and the young, both men and women. He would often enter homes in the early morning hours, shooting or bludgeoning his victims. Some were raped or forced to perform satanic rituals. Ramirez would frequently leave behind evidence of his Satanist beliefs. Richard Ramirez was caught in August 1985. His face had been broadcast on television and printed on the cover of every major California newspaper. Recognized by the public in East Los Angeles, he was chased down by a group of residents who detained him until police arrived. The trial of Richard Ramirez began in 1989 and was a significant media event. The evidence against him was overwhelming. It included fingerprints, stolen property, and witness testimonies. He was found guilty of 13 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 counts of sexual assault, and 14 counts of burglary, among other charges. Ramirez received multiple death sentences for his crimes. While awaiting execution in San Quentin State Prison, he died on June 7, 2013, of complications related to B-cell lymphoma. Ramirez had a troubled upbringing. He had been exposed to graphic, violent images and stories from a young age, particularly from a cousin who had served in the Vietnam War. He also had a history of drug abuse, predominantly cocaine. Ramirez's belief in Satanism played a role in his crimes. He often made his victims swear to Satan, or would draw pentagrams at crime scenes. The Night Stalker's reign of terror had a profound impact on the residents of Southern California. Many purchased weapons for self-defense, reinforced their doors and windows, and some even moved away. The case became emblematic of the fear that a serial killer could strike anyone, anywhere, at any time. Ramirez's case has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and films. As his crimes and the subsequent media frenzy left an indelible mark on American crime history, the Laci Peterson murder case captivated the United States. In the early 2000s, due to its tragic nature and subsequent media frenzy surrounding the investigation and trial, Laci Peterson was born on May 4, 1975, in Modesto, California. She was a substitute teacher. She married Scott Peterson, a fertilizer salesman, in 1997. By 2002, Laci was 8 months pregnant with her first child, a son they planned to name Connor. On December 24, 2002, Laci Peterson was reported missing from her home in Modesto, California. She was last seen by her husband, Scott Peterson, who said he left their home that morning to go fishing at the Berkeley Marina. When he returned home that evening and found Laci missing, he called her mother, who subsequently called the police. Laci's disappearance became a major news story, attracting widespread media attention. Volunteer searches began immediately, and the police started investigating Scott due to inconsistencies in his story and his seemingly detached behavior. It was discovered that Scott was having an extramarital affair with a woman named Amber Frey, who was unaware that he was married. Frey eventually cooperated with the police and recorded phone calls with Scott. Scott's accounts of his actions and whereabouts on the day Laci disappeared contained inconsistencies. Scott's public appearances and interviews, which often presented him in a bad light, led to further public suspicion. On April 13, 2003, the decomposed body of a late-term male fetus was found on the shoreline of San Francisco Bay. The next day, the body of a recently pregnant woman washed ashore a mile away from where the baby was found. DNA tests confirmed that these were the remains of Lachie and her unborn son, Connor. Scott Peterson was arrested on April 18, 2003, in San Diego and was charged with 2 felony counts of murder, with special circumstances: first-degree murder of Lachie and second-degree murder of Connor. The trial began in June 2004. One of the main pieces of evidence was the GPS tracking on Scott's vehicle, which showed he made multiple trips to the Berkeley Marina after Lachie disappeared. The prosecution argued that Scott killed Lachie in their home, then transported her body in his boat and dumped her in the San Francisco Bay. On November 12, 2004, after a high-profile trial, Scott Peterson was convicted of first-degree murder for Lachie's death and second-degree murder for the death of their unborn son. On March 16, 2005, he was sentenced to death. Scott Peterson's conviction and sentence have been the subject of numerous appeals, documentaries, and public debate. Some believe there may have been a rush to judgment due to the intense media coverage and public sentiment against Scott. Peterson remains on death row in California, but there have been developments in his appeal process that could potentially lead to a new trial. Dennis Rader, also known as the BTK killer, is one of the most notorious serial killers in U.S. history. The acronym BTK stands for bind, torture, kill, which was his modus operandi. Dennis Rader's killings began in 1974 with the brutal murders of the Otero family. Over the years, he would claim other victims, each time eluding capture. Rader was meticulous and often taunted law enforcement and the media with letters detailing his crimes. Rader evaded capture for decades, in part due to his habit of sending taunting letters to police and local media. Through these letters, he gave himself the BTK moniker. These letters contained details of the crimes, poems, and puzzles. He seemed to thrive on the attention and the fear he generated in the community. Rader's desire for attention eventually led to his capture. In 2004, after a period of silence, Rader began sending letters again. He sent a floppy disk to the police, and investigators were able to extract metadata from a deleted Microsoft Word document on the disk. This led them to a church where Rader was a member. Coupled with the DNA sample obtained from Rader's daughter's medical records, the evidence was enough to arrest him in 2005. Dennis Rader was arrested, and subsequently confessed to all the BTK murders. He gave a chillingly emotionless account of his crimes in court, describing the details without any apparent remorse. Dennis Rader pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms in prison, as Kansas did not have the death penalty at the time of his sentencing. Rader's motives seemed to center around the need for power, control, and attention. He often stalked his victims before choosing them, and many of his killings were sexually motivated. He lived a double life. On one side, he was a church president, a scout leader, and a family man. On the other, he was a brutal murderer. Those who knew him were shocked by his confession, as he appeared to be just a regular member of the community. The BTK case is a stark reminder that sometimes the most dangerous individuals can hide behind a facade of normalcy. It also highlights the importance of technological advancements in crime solving, as it was essentially a computer forensics breakthrough that led to Rader's capture after so many years. The case of the Golden State Killer is one of the most notorious and protracted serial crime sprees in U.S. history. Spanning from the mid-1970s to the mid-1980s, the perpetrator was responsible for a series of crimes including burglaries, rapes, and murders. It wasn't until 2018 that an arrest was made. Largely due to advances in DNA technology, the Golden State Killer is the name given to Joseph James D'Angelo, who committed more than 12 murders, over 50 sexual assaults, and over 100 burglaries in California from 1974 to 1986. For a long time, the crimes were attributed to multiple culprits: the East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker, and the Visalia Ransacker. before it was determined they were all the same individual. The Golden State Killer's crimes began as burglaries and escalated into rapes and murders. He was known for stalking his potential victims, breaking into their homes while they slept, and often tying up and assaulting them. The level of planning and the detailed knowledge he seemed to have about his victims was particularly chilling. The investigation into the Golden State Killer's crimes stretched for decades. Despite thousands of tips and numerous leads, he remained elusive. The case went cold for years. Interest in the case was renewed in the 2000s as cold case detectives, journalists, and amateur sleuths started revisiting the unsolved crimes. The case garnered significant public attention, particularly following the release of the book I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara in 2018. McNamara coined the name Golden State Killer, and her book painted a detailed account of the case and her own obsession with it. In 2018, investigators made a breakthrough using a novel forensic technique. They used a public genealogy database to identify potential relatives of the killer based on DNA left at crime scenes. This led them to Joseph James D'Angelo. After surreptitiously obtaining his DNA from a car door handle and a discarded tissue, they found a match with the DNA from his crime scenes. D'Angelo, a former police officer in the 70s, was arrested at his home in Citrus Heights, California. In June 2020, D'Angelo pleaded guilty to multiple counts of murder and kidnapping, sparing him from a potential death penalty trial. He also admitted to numerous crimes he wasn't charged for, including the rapes, due to the statute of limitations having expired. In August 2020, D'Angelo was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The capture and conviction of the Golden State Killer was a significant moment in the history of American criminal justice, not just because of the severity and duration of his crimes, but also because of the innovative DNA techniques used to identify and capture him. The Patty Hearst kidnapping is one of the most infamous and widely discussed true crime cases in American history, not just because of the sensational aspects of the crime itself, but because of the complex political, social, and psychological factors surrounding it. Patricia Campbell Hearst, the granddaughter of the American publishing magnate William Randolph Hearst, was kidnapped on February 4, 1974. Patty, as she was often called, was kidnapped from her Berkeley, California, apartment by a group called the Symbionese Liberation Army, or SLA. The SLA was a small radical leftist group, known for its revolutionary rhetoric and criminal activities. After the kidnapping, the SLA demanded that the Hearst family donate millions of dollars in food to the needy of California as a condition for Patty's release. The Hearst family tried to meet these demands to some extent, organizing a massive food giveaway. However, the SLA criticized the efforts as inadequate and didn't release Patty as promised. A few months after her kidnapping, Patty Hearst surfaced in a bank surveillance video. In a shocking turn, she was seen participating in a bank robbery alongside the kidnappers. She had adopted the name Tanya and issued statements in support of the SLA and its causes. This transformation raised a major question. Had Patty Hearst willingly joined her captors, or was she suffering from Stockholm Syndrome, a psychological phenomenon in which hostages develop emotional bonds with their captors? Patty Hearst and other SLA members were eventually apprehended in September 1975. Her trial became a media sensation. Hearst's defense was that she had been brainwashed and coerced into joining the SLA. However, in 1976, she was found guilty of bank robbery and sentenced to 35 years in prison. President Jimmy Carter commuted her sentence after she served 22 months, and in 2001, President Bill Clinton granted her a full pardon. Patty Hearst's case remains a topic of debate and discussion. Some view her as a victim of kidnapping and brainwashing, while others see her as a willing participant in the SLA's criminal activities. The case has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and films. Beyond the sensational elements, the case touches on issues like media influence, the radical political climate of the 1970s, the nature of free will, and the complexities of the criminal justice system. It remains an enduring symbol of a tumultuous era in American history. The Adam Walsh case is a heartbreaking and significant chapter in the annals of American true crime history. primarily because of the profound impact it had on child protection and law enforcement policies. On July 27, 1981, 6-year-old Adam Walsh disappeared from a Sears department store at the Hollywood Mall in Hollywood, Florida. Adam's mother, Reeve Walsh, left him briefly in the toy section of the store while she looked for a lamp. When she returned, he was gone. On August 10, 1981, approximately 2 weeks after his disappearance, Adam's severed head was found in a canal approximately 120 miles away from his house. His body was never recovered. The police faced a lot of criticism for their handling of the case. Early missteps and the lack of proper resources hindered the investigation. Numerous suspects and leads were considered over the years, but no substantial evidence was found that directly linked any particular individual to Adam's murder. In 1983, Otis Toole, a drifter and convicted serial killer, confessed to Adam's murder. He provided details about the crime and claimed he had abducted Adam from the mall and later killed him. However, inconsistencies in his story and a lack of physical evidence led to doubts. At one point, Toole recanted his confession, only to later reconfess. In 1996, Toole died in prison while serving a life sentence for other crimes. It wasn't until December 2008, after years of controversy regarding Toole's confessions, that the Hollywood Police Department announced that they were closing the Adam Walsh case and posthumously naming Otis Toole as the killer, citing lost evidence that could have conclusively linked Toole to the crime. In response to his son's murder and the perceived ineptitude of authorities, Adam's father, John Walsh, became an outspoken advocate for the rights of missing and exploited children. He co-founded the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and became the host of the television show America's Most Wanted. This show played a pivotal role in capturing many fugitives by enlisting the public's help. The Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act, signed into law by President George W. Bush in 2006, established a national database of convicted child molesters, increased penalties for federal offenses against children, and addressed shortcomings in the national and state sex offender registry systems. The tragic case of Adam Walsh changed how American society and law enforcement responded to child abductions and led to substantial changes in policies and public awareness efforts related to the safety and protection of children. The disappearance of Natalee Holloway is one of the most widely publicized missing person cases of the 21st century. Natalee Holloway, an 18-year-old American woman from Mountain Brook, Alabama, disappeared on May 30, 2005, while on a high school graduation trip to Aruba, a Caribbean island. She was last seen leaving a bar and nightclub called Carlos and Charlie's in the capital of Aruba in the early hours of the morning with 3 local men, Joran Vandersloot and brothers Deepak and Satish Kalpo. The 3 men last seen with Natalee were initially arrested but released without charges due to a lack of evidence. They provided contradictory statements about the last time they saw Holloway, but all claimed that they dropped her off at her hotel and did not harm her. Both local authorities and American investigators conducted extensive searches for Holloway, but they did not find any evidence of her whereabouts. Her case generated significant media attention in the U.S., with several TV specials, documentaries, and news programs covering it over the years. Vandersloot gave several conflicting statements and confessions related to the Holloway disappearance, only to later retract them. His inconsistent narratives made it difficult for authorities to discern the truth about what happened to Holloway. In 2010, Vandersloot was arrested and subsequently convicted for the murder of Stephanie Flores in Lima, Peru. He was sentenced to 28 years in prison for that crime. This further casts suspicion on his involvement in Holloway's disappearance, although no concrete evidence linking him to it has been found. Over the years, there have been various leads, potential witnesses, and alleged discoveries of remains, but none have conclusively solved the mystery of Holloway's disappearance. The case had a significant impact on Aruba's tourism industry, with many Americans initially boycotting the destination because of perceptions of mishandled investigations. Holloway's disappearance has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and television specials. Her mother, Beth Holloway, became an advocate for families of missing persons and authored a book about her daughter's disappearance. After serving his sentence for the murder in Peru. Vandersloot is expected to be extradited to the U.S. on charges of extortion and wire fraud related to the Holloway case. He had allegedly tried to extort money from Holloway's family in exchange for information about her whereabouts. The Texas Tower shooting on August 1, 1966, by Charles Whitman, is one of the earliest and most infamous mass shootings in American history. Charles Whitman was a 25-year-old former Marine and student at the University of Texas. Before the tower incident, Whitman had shown signs of mental disturbance. He had sought professional help and had expressed violent urges in the past. In his journals, he expressed concern about his own mental state, and even requested in a suicide note that an autopsy be performed on his brain, to find out if there was a reason for his actions and headaches. Later, an autopsy did reveal a pick-and-sized tumor, but its impact on his actions remains a matter of debate. On the morning of the shooting, before heading to the university, Whitman killed his mother, Margaret, in her apartment, and then his wife Kathy, in their shared residence. After killing his family, Whitman made his way to the University of Texas campus. He came prepared, bringing with him a footlocker filled with supplies, including food, water, and a variety of weapons. He first entered the main building of the university, and after killing a receptionist and wounding others, he made his way to the observation deck of the tower. From this vantage point, which was nearly 300 feet in the air, he began firing at people below. Over the course of 96 minutes, Whitman indiscriminately shot at people on the ground, resulting in a total of 16 dead and over 30 wounded. The police, aided by armed civilians, tried to stop Whitman. The lack of adequate communication and unpreparedness for such an event made it challenging to manage the situation. Ultimately, Whitman was killed by police officers Houston McCoy and Ramiro Martinez, who bravely ascended the tower to confront him. The Texas Tower shooting was a shock to the nation, and led to a re-evaluation of police tactics in response to such events. The tragedy also fostered a growing awareness of the need for better mental health services and understanding. This event has been the subject of numerous documentaries, books, and articles. It is remembered not only for its horror, but also for the acts of heroism displayed by both civilians and law enforcement on that tragic day. Our hearts and thoughts go out to the victims and families associated with these horrendous crimes. If you or anyone you know is struggling with mental issues or dark thoughts, please reach out to a professional. Help is available. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe for more content. Until next time, stay curious.